Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I'm here talking with someone who's really kind of exciting. I actually landed up meeting her at a conversation. That's how most people meet. But this was one of those post-COVID conversations, and we landed up finding out more about each other. And what I discovered was she is a researcher. And I'm going to read this out verbatim because I understand some of those words. She's a researcher who's developing using strategies for people with chronic conditions to best manage their disease, to prevent complications or worsening, and even potentially cure them. In this capacity, she leverages technology, healthy behavior theory, and behavioral economics to do so. Our guest is the assistant professor of medicine and epidemiology at the University of Pennsylvania and is an adult nephrologist. She is too modest to put the MD behind her name, but she is that too. And I'm not quite sure why she cringed at that. She literally is one.
I don't know. It's fine.
It's fine.
Well, I also have a master's of science too, so.
Oh, there you go. MDMS.
Oh, yeah.
So you can find her on Twitter at Sarah J. Schrauben, or you can find her at this really, really long email of sarah.schrauben@penmedicine.upenn.edu. But my guest for today is Sarah Schrauben. How are you, Dr. Schrauben?
Hi there, and thanks for having me. I'm excited to, see what we stumble on in terms of topics.
Well, I'm really excited because you were telling me a little bit about the types of projects you're starting on, and you just got funded to do two separate projects. Mm-hmm. And we're going to stick with the one that I think you probably do in your sleep already, but you're probably you either are already or will soon be one of the world's leading experts on this, which is on kidney disease. Specifically, you are looking at evaluating kidney disease and trying to prevent it based on real world evidence. I want to hear a little bit more about it to the extent you're allowed to talk about
it. So I guess maybe we'll rewind a little bit into what inspired me, because this can kind of be extrapolated to a lot of other chronic conditions. But so when I have a patient and in clinic and they ask me, what can I do? What can I do? And I'm honestly like, take your medicines and generally be healthy, like everyone's supposed to be active enough, all US adults supposed to get 150 minutes a week. So Darshan, and then, people are, everyone's supposed to eat healthy and, all these things, but so some of my initial studies are actually within the kidney disease population, like how well can these prevent progression of your kidney disease or death or heart attacks? And they do just as well as the general population. So even though it's within the guidelines, us as nephrologists and I guess doctors in general, sometimes it's easier just to prescribe people medications. But honestly, these things that people can do themselves, like diet and exercise, which are, people look at them as almost immovable targets, can be just as effective. And a lot of my research is also qualitative, meaning, I do like focus groups and interviews. When I talk to people about, living with kidney disease and treatment plans, they want things that they can do themselves. So things that will actually empower them and feel like they have some control over. So that's why a lot of my research is kind of developing programs for people to, leverage this innate ability or innate motivation I think everyone has, take control of themselves. And this is kind of where health behavior theory comes in, and behavioral economics is more of, incentivization, but then also to try to maintain these behaviors. Because that's actually, like, I would say is the hardest thing, is that, you sometimes get people to do things, but actually to keep them there is really difficult, which is super important for any chronic disease, because obviously it's a chronic disease, it's going to be with you for many years. So So yeah, it's not like quitting smoking, which, financial incentives can be very powerful, but, that's like a one-time thing. It's not like managing blood pressure that you do every day. So, um, yeah, I think now I forget your question.
No,
Hopefully, did I answer it somewhere in there?
you actually, I asked the question, then you just decided a different question.
Okay.
So the question you decided to answer, which you did answer, was what inspired you to go down this kidney research route? And what you explained was the inspiration, which was you were trying to address the question that all your patients are asking you, which is, what can I do? And the answer is diet and exercise. And it's a very unsexy advice, and it's something that no one wants to do.
Exactly. And that's why in my world and chronic diseases, it seems like low-hanging fruit is because no one wants to do it because it's hard. Reaching for a medicine or escalating a medicine is much easier than getting someone to walk 1,000 steps more each day.
Right.
Even though it potentially could be as effective at lowering their blood pressure or helping their kidney disease. But yeah, so I've been met with, quite some resistance, but if we're being more patient oriented or, they want to do this. So I think that the researchers or doctors, we view that it's really hard, but I think we're more in alignment of what patients want, then we should, encourage them instead of just think that they don't want to do it. Does that make sense?
It does. So what you're saying is we need to incentivize the process of diet and exercise. And is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean that's what I was reading. I did interviews after one of my programs that was about home blood pressure monitoring and wearing Fitbits for 12 weeks. And one of the patients said, I don't know why my doctor hasn't talked to me about this. This is definitely something I would want to do, and I plan on continuing to do it. I'd rather do this than reach for another medicine or start a new medicine if this can actually be just as effective. So,
But don't you think that insurers have been doing this? Like, I remember going back 10 years, insurers have been saying, we'll pay for your gym membership if you agree to go to it X number of times a year.
Yeah. So,
but you're not happy with that.
But I think that, another part of my research is investigating barriers and facilitators for these behaviors. So in, let's say, a lot of my populations from West Philadelphia, deep West Philadelphia, are there that many?
Deep West Philadelphia.
What was that?
What is deep West Philadelphia?
Like West Philadelphia. That's what I mean by deep. So not like 40th Street. So or 34th, So
deep.
Yeah. So what was I saying? Oh, so those gyms have to be available. How are people gonna get that way? If they don't have funds for like a public transportation, or there's not someone to go with you, we can't just slap a Band-Aid on it. So that's what you really need to work with these interventions with theories to know and talk to people like, will it work? So yeah, when I hear that, I'm just like, that's a lot of, I just see so many barriers rather than like throwing money at it.
So what you're saying though is you've identified this problem. You've now discovered that it is there are barriers to fixing this problem. But what you're saying is you now want to measure and fix it. So what are you positing in your research? I mean, you basics of 101 research, you have a theory. So what's your theory?
So I think if we can support people as much as possible and give them the tools, they will do these things that we ask them to do. Is that a theory?
No, I can work with that being a theory or a null hypothesis, but My question though is, if you give them the tools, what would motivate them? Because you need intrinsic motivation at that point.
Well, that's true. So, so that's why I was talking about sustainability is like
Yeah.
the holy grail,
Yeah.
for lack of better terms. So, and we've kind of found out financial incentives don't work because this is an everyday for the rest of your life kind of thing,
Yeah.
and that's not very feasible. So actually, my next study, which I didn't tell you about yet, I'm I'm trying to leverage social incentives. So competing with people people you don't know, competing with yourself. So which could be sustainable. So let's say you get a report every week or every day to say, I can't remember where you live, but let's say all the rest of the people on the street walked
Deep West Philadelphia. That's where I live.
yeah, okay. They walked 5,000 steps, and Darshan, you walked 1,000 steps this
Right.
past week. So that like normative or comparative information leverages your like intrinsic motivation, because you're like, oh man, then it, you kind of have a competition, but all it is information. And so it takes like a financial incentive out of the equation, and that makes it more, feasible for a longer running study.
But doesn't Fitbit have a version of that? Like I get a weekly response.
Yeah. So research has shown that it is more of a motivator the close, like proximity, right? So the more proximal you feel to the comparative or normative information.
Sure.
So that's why I used your street. So then you're like, dang, did Judy down at, the block away?
Right.
You like kicking my butt? That's
Right.
more powerful than being like, oh, someone in Sweden is like getting 10,000 steps. You're like, whatever.
Right. But if that's true, how do you handle the obvious privacy issues that pop out of that?
Yeah. So do not share location data. So it's anonymous. So it's a way, it's also like semantics. So like health communication is a lot goes into this. So, so there was a study done where a lot of this motivation comes from. Have you been at hotels where where it says you can leave your towels on the ground, or, like pick them up and we won't wash them.
Yeah.
So they did a study that showed different messaging.
Right.
Like if they were like the rest of the people in the hotel, 25% of the people saved this amount of trees, or people who stayed in this room on this floor, had a greater percentage of not using the towels. But the closer the messaging got to who like you were, the more that they're motivated to not use their towels. So there's just phrasing. So you can just say, so in my study, I'm going to be like, other people with diabetes, kidney disease, and high blood pressure that are also enrolled in this 12-week study, they've done this amount. Right. Just so they feel like connected. So you don't actually need to share, location data or any names, but it just so the messaging feels proximal. That makes sense?
It does. What I hear you saying is you're basically going to provide de-identified data to patients to help them respond to it and to feel that proximity, as you put it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that's all I was going to say.
So what I hear you saying is that you're kind of working on cutting edge stuff, right? So you're working on real world evidence. You're working on health equity, addressing issues of health equity by meeting patients where their needs are. So if you don't have a gym near you, your insurer's ability to pay you to go to the gym is practically useless. So you're saying, we'll talk to you about Fitbits. If you're trying to collect this data for kidney patients who are saying, I want to do something, I don't want to take pills. What do you think are the barriers in doing this type of research? Because I mean, when I think of research and I think about the type of research I'm usually involved in is FDA type of research. And in those cases, you're running it by IRBs. There's a strict protocol. There's a treatment arm. There's a non-treatment arm, and or technically there are two treatment arms, but different modalities. And you're doing this whole thing. But what I'm really hearing from you is a type of observational type of study strategy, which is usually seen more in the social sciences. So how do you, what I hear you saying is you're bringing the social sciences into the hard sciences or STEM, whatever you want to call it. And it's a square peg in a round hole, at least for now, until that figures itself out. So talk to me a little bit about what struggles you've had trying to put that square peg in a round hole.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. So it's been a little bit difficult finding a home because I don't feel like I really have a home. So the University of Pennsylvania doesn't have a public health school per se, but a lot of people like me exist in a public health school. Struggles, right. So I guess social scientists look at me like you're not a real social scientist, and hard science people look at me and they're like, you're not really a hard scientist. But there is, I'm sure you probably heard of PCORi, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Network. So that's where a lot of quote unquote my people go. So there can be called like behavioral interventionists. Most of the people are actually psychologists, social or clinical psychologists. I'm just an MD that finds it really interesting and has like, read up and, been trained in different methods. So yeah, as an MD, it's been a little bit challenging because I'm usually kind of the only person with clinical background training as a physician doing this. But I think it's exciting, and I really like collaborative work, and working with different disciplines and expertise. So to me, it's not that I don't think any other discipline brings more or less than I think my perspective. So yeah, I guess, yeah, it's been challenging to start my career, but now that I have demonstrated some success, people have generally just left me alone. So
what I hear you saying is you're literally dealing with the Rodney Dangerfield of effects, which is you get no respect for.
So I think, when people don't understand, or it's not something they're used to seeing, it's not like they don't jump to not respecting you. I think they just kind of don't think of you, or they, they're just like, they just ignore it. So maybe if ignorance is disrespect, then maybe, but you know what I mean? So I think people just generally don't know what I do. So they're like, oh yeah, she's a researcher, but we don't really know what she does.
But there's literally an agency dedicated to this, PCORi, as you pointed out, and PCORi is huge because as patient engagement, patient centricity becomes a bigger and bigger issue, people are saying, I don't want to be in your stilted, made up studies where you create a fictionalized version of you only take this treatment and there are these inclusion-exclusion criteria. That's not reality. You're meeting people where they are, and you're trying to get this real-world evidence together. I guess my question for you is, your people are the PCORi people, as you put it. How has that engagement been like for you?
So, I mean, I would say people like me are in PCORi. I haven't yet applied for a PCORi grant because they usually come out with basically set agenda for their agenda. And my current research hasn't really fit well into those funding announcements, but I will, I think, soon. Kind of in what I briefly mentioned to you earlier was about functional status or independent living, that PCORi is getting more and more interested in that aspect as well. And there was just a funding announcement about um, mental and physical functioning for older adults and trying to create interventions to maintain mental and physical function for adults.
So it's really interesting to me because what you're doing is trying to develop basically a whole new type of research function. I mean, it exists, don't get me wrong, but it exists in a very different way than we conceptualize research. So my question for you is, who's funding something like this? Because I mean, University of Pennsylvania is going, look, we'll fund a little bit of this, but we can't do a whole department. And pharma companies are going, you're basically trying to put me out of business. And PCORi is going, look, there are a lot of you guys, I'm not funding all this. So who's really going in and saying, we're interested?
Well, pharma, I would say, pharma strictly to speak, but if we're going larger, like industry, it is within the realm of like digital health solutions. So I mean, they're not funding me, at least yet. I don't really have a product available that's ready for prime time, but so that's also what I say is a bit challenging. But I was going to say, when you were talking about PCORi, the NIH has become so much more interested in patient involvement and patient centeredness. So I will say that that's evolving at NIH. So I hope that some of the stuff that I'm doing will be more applicable and fundable there. I would say right now I have grants from like foundations, and the NIH is funding some of it. Some of it, I just have to get preliminary data so the hard science people believe me, and some of that is coming out of my Penn funds. So I just kind of have to prove to other people that this is legit. So so I think I think this is pretty status quo for anything that's at the beginning stages, so it doesn't discourage me. It's just kind of like, I told you so, or I'm going to tell you. So someone about 8 years ago told me that I was interested in soft science in a very negative way. But, now I'm here, and I feel like I am straddling, hard and soft science. So I think it's, there is a path, it wasn't necessarily the easy one, but
it raises this interesting area that everyone's going to keep exploring, because there's a ton of interest in this area. What you just described to me is a lot of the funding will eventually come from maybe the digital health companies, which would be great, but initially is going to be this idea that foundations and the like will probably end up funding a lot of this. My question for you is, usually there's a huge issue in academic funding, in that there are almost these cabals, if you will, of individuals who decide where the funding goes.
Yeah.
Now, what you just described to me a few seconds ago was you get no respect because you're a square peg in a round hole, which means that you are looking to be part of these cabals who are going, you're an MD, I'm a PsyD. You're an MD, I'm a PhD. You're an MD, I'm a social scientist. How are you addressing that need for funding?
Well, so interesting enough that you say this is that I just actually received one of the Penn School of Medicine awards that typically is not for social sciences. So somehow I convinced them that, what I was proposing was legit enough. So like I said, I think with the tide shifting with NIH, I also think people who are hardcore, the only science is hard science, that is also changing. So I don't know, time will tell, but I do, just from just that award that I got like 2 weeks ago or last week, I think that that's just like real evidence that I can get some street cred. um, but the other thing I was going to say is that I am partnering with some um digital or other health infrastructure industry companies that are kind of lending me services um, like for pilot activities, and then potentially would be involved in like a larger, bigger NIH grant. So that is kind of also helping me move science forward, especially on the technology front.
Do you worry that, especially right now in this nascent area of science, you're what a lot of people aim for in the hard sciences, which is there's no corruption. You're in this pure space,
Mm-hmm.
but what people forget is when you're in this pure space, there's no funding. You need money to do this. So now you're getting digital health companies saying we'll fund you. Do you worry that this, and right now it's necessary, but what happens down the road? Do you think that the research in this space will have the same quote unquote tainting as pharma allegedly taints clinical research?
So I liken it to like if a drug company to an investigator donated, let's say, like a beta blocker for a post MI study.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's basically what they're doing for me. So
Correct.
maybe it will steer me in the direction of using their technology. That's true. I mean, I have done due diligence of looking at multiple companies to see, which, might be best. But you're right. I think it could, steer, maybe certain interventions or bigger studies towards their direction. But I don't know how to counteract that. Like, how can, when the beta blockers first came out, how do the doctors or who was doing the studies, how do they, how do you develop another, medication like a beta blocker? Yeah. So sometimes I think it's necessary, and it's great that there are collaborative avenues to do that. So
now let me ask you one last question. We're well past time, but obviously I can keep going with this. But let me ask you this one last question, which is one of the problems the hard sciences have with social science research is the rigor of the research. And that, I mean, I've spoken to some very, very well-respected researchers in the social sciences at some of the best schools in the country. And the study methodology was ridiculous. You took the same data and just kept slicing it and dicing it in different ways to get different answers. And that was considered to be par for the course. And when you went, that's just bad research, the response was, well, we'll just do more studies. And this is just supposed to be the introduction to it. My question to you is, are you finding yourself bringing hard science methodology to social science research? Or do you find yourself saying, you know what, I just at this moment, I'm in a proof of concept phase, and I just want to get some research started? Where are you, and how are you sort of bringing it together?
So for starters, I would say that I've been part of lots of research consortia that have very, very well-respected members in them from probably the same institutions that you're talking about, that in the hard science take the data sets and slice and dice it exactly what we want. So that's not a social sciences problem. I think it's the person, like the integrity of the person in their research. So the social sciences, actually, I was just going through all these interviews that we did, and the rigor that we go through, that we, decide on the exact same questions that we're going to ask everybody. We're going to triple or double code or triple code and each interview, so I think that it can be done in a very rigorous fashion. And maybe you're alluding to the fact that, maybe it just happens to be that I think that, I apply a lot of like the same rigorous technique with my hard science world and my soft science. But in soft sciences, there are definite steps to follow and, to confirm like you have valid findings. You don't have a p-value, but there are all, many other ways to check for your answer, including like adequate sample size. And so I would say that that's not a valid argument to say that soft science is not as rigorous.
Well, so that's what I hear you saying is soft science is not only not as rigorous, it is as rigorous depending on what you're doing. And therefore, you're not adding or taking anything new. You're just continuing to apply the right methodology for the right situation.
Exactly. That's a better, more succinct answer.
I love it. I love that response. So, Sarah, this was amazing. And obviously, we can keep going, but we do need to call it at some point. My question for you is, how can people reach you?
So I think you put on the Twitter handle or my email. That would be fantastic. I really welcome any collaborations, ideas. I don't know, just thinking outside the box. And I really love collaborating with people of all different disciplines. So please reach out. So help me find a home.
Perfect. I may already have some ideas for you, so we'll talk about that offline. This was wonderful having you on. Any parting words before we go?
That's really put on the spot. I mean, just don't do something just because it's hard. So
you mean don't not do something?
Yes. Yes. What Darshan said. Don't not do, the double negatives. So I can't do the double negative, so that's why I didn't say it. So, but what you said.
We're on the same page. Got it. Thank you again, Dr. Schrauben. That was amazing.